What's going on, everybody? I'm James Young with jamesyoungphotography.com, and this is Teach Me How to Lightroom. Today we have Lightroom CC. It's brand new, it's hot off the shelf, and it's a brand new user experience. It's a brand new user interface, and I want to be able to take you guys from 0 to 100 real quick so that you can be able to be successful when using Lightroom CC. You can see here that right off the bat, I already have a few images here that have been uploaded to Lightroom CC. And don't worry, I'm not cheating because I'm gonna take you here through all the steps necessary so that we can ground ourselves in the fundamentals of this program, because again, it's totally brand new. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is over here on the left hand side. This is really where we're going to interact with our libraries, so to speak, or our albums. So if you click this icon here, you're going to see it opens up a panel that says My Photos. And by default, it's going to have all photos selected, but you can see down here we have albums. So now our collections are stored as albums. You can see here I already have one album imported. It's called Drone Images. So let's walk through the steps on how to add a new album. Over on the right hand side there's a plus button, and you can click on Create Album. And you can name this whatever you want, a new album. Unless you want the photos that you currently have selected, make sure you uncheck this box here so that when you create a new album, it will be empty and void of any photos, unless that's your intention, is to bring in photos that don't currently belong to an album. You can click Create, and you can see here I now have a new album that is completely empty. And very appropriately, Lightroom gives us the ability here to add photos to an album. Now, alternatively, you can press the plus button up here to just start adding photos however you want. Now I have a photo shoot here already selected. I'm going to press Command A to select all of them and start reviewing for import. Now it took all the images I selected, and we are now reviewing these images for an import. And you can see here, this is a photo session I recently did, and I want to put this into a new album. And you can see here, the top middle of the screen, it's going to give us the option to add to an album. And you can see here, it already has a new album, the one that we just created, selected by default. Now this is actually a drop down menu, and this is pretty cool because once you click it, it will give you a list of all your existing albums, or you can create a totally brand new one, or you can just have them freeform, not in any album. Now I wouldn't generally recommend doing that, but I'm sure there are scenarios in which that is necessary and or a good idea. For here, we're going to create another new album, and I'm just going to call this Spider Girl Create, and it creates that album on the back end for us. And then at the top right, we're going to be able to add 148 photos. Now, for sake of time, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to deselect some of them, and I'm just going to add a couple of these images here. So we can just scroll through, we can select which ones we want to add. And let's add this one. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Let's go ahead and add this one. And one more. Let's just go ahead and add this one as well. So we're only going to add 4 photos, should be relatively quick. And you can see it starts doing its thing just like Lightroom normally would. Now you can see here under My Photos, it now took us to recently added just now. Lightroom Classic does this as well as the most recent import. And you can see here under my albums, I now have my Spider Girl session as well as a folder full of drone images. So let's get into how we can view these images and how we're going to interact with them while we're viewing them. The way I have them currently being displayed is the detail view, or by pressing D on the keyboard. Gone are the ways of library and develop. These have been looped into one combined module, which is pretty cool because I know it was a big frustration for some folks. They want to try and start editing, but they're in library mode. Then they got to switch to develop, and then they're just trying to navigate things, and they're wondering why things were taking so long to load, but it's because they're in develop mode, and so on and so forth. But now that's no longer the case. So here I'm in the detail view, but if I want to take a look at all of my images at a glance, I could press G or click over here down at the bottom to go to the photo grid. So here we have a much more updated, much more modern approach to displaying a group of images. Here's my drone album. Here's my Spider Girl album. And we can just start clicking through these really quickly. There is also another view here of the square grid, and you can cycle between these by pressing G or by clicking down here at the bottom. Now, when we want to edit one of these photos, let's press D to get into the detail view, and here we are. And we can still navigate through these just like we normally would and go through and select the image that we want to go ahead and edit. Let's go ahead and take a look at this image. A lot of the keyboard shortcuts still exist. Some of them are actually different. For example, if you click to zoom in, you can still toggle your zoom by pressing spacebar. But if you're culling and you're flagging photos, you're going through, you want to flag some to accept, you want to flag some to reject, instead of pressing P, that no longer does a pick, you're going to want to press Z to pick, which is actually a pretty smart move because reject is still X. And now flag and reject are nice and close to each other, so you can spam this all day long with one hand instead of using two hands to call. So that is actually a really cool move by Adobe, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to leave this as a pick because I think this is a great photo. This is a photo worth editing. Now, here's where things get super different. Once we start editing, all of our modules are now separated in a way that is a little bit different. Our editing module is still on this right hand side, and it's still pretty familiar, but it's a little different. Now check this out. We can press E on our keyboard, or we can just click, and we get a lot of our editing tools right here. So starting from the top and going down, very similar to how Lightroom Classic is, we have groupings of various editing areas. In Lightroom Classic, we had our color balance was kind of at the top, but here at the very top, we have our light. So that's going to be our exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, etc., etc. So let's just start off with adding some contrast here, just a little bit, not too much. We're going to open up our shadows a little bit. We're also going to open up the blacks a hair, and we'll turn down our highlights just a little bit. As we scroll down, we're going to hit our color. Now this is where they have now lumped in temperature and tint along with the vibrance and the saturation. And by default, that's all we're going to see. But if we look on the right hand side, we're going to see a color palette here, which is going to give us more color details. So when we click here and open up our color mixer, we're going to have our HSL area that we had previously in Lightroom Classic. So you can see here we have our color, our hue, our saturation, and our luminance. And for those of us like myself who prefer to have the HSL all lumped together, you use this color selection, you select your color, and you have hue, saturation, luminance, HSL, all lumped together. This is great. So if we want to have a more moody approach to this image, we can take our greens, drop them down quite a bit, take our yellows, drop them down a little bit, take our oranges only a hair. That's where our skin tones usually lie. Don't mess with those too much, etc., etc. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse these now. I'm going to collapse the light. We're done with light. With color, I want to make this a little warmer. No, not that much. There we go, right about there. Maybe turn down vibrance just a little bit. There we go, add a little bit more yellow. And let's go ahead and collapse color, and let's move on to effects. Now, this is really cool because I've been wanting them to do this with Lightroom for probably a year now, ever since they introduced Haze. I've wanted them to do this for a long time. Haze is now in an area that makes a lot more sense. With our effects, we have our clarity. If you're doing portraits, kind of be careful with that. Don't make your subject skin look like trash. Don't do that. I'm gonna go ahead and undo clarity. But dehaze is where we can get rid of the haze in the image and add a little bit of contrast that way. And then of course we can add our vignette by dragging this to the left. It will add a darker vignette. If you drag it to the right, I'll probably just unfollow you because that looks terrible. And let's go ahead and undo that by double clicking on the slider. So let's go ahead and collapse effects and keep moving down to detail. Now this is, again, this is a much easier way of accessing things that were kind of buried. With our detail, we can add our sharpening, we can do some noise reduction, you can add grain if you want to ruin the quality of your image. I'm going to go ahead and undo that, and that is where we're at for detail. So let's collapse that, keep moving down, and here's our optics. This is where we can tackle our chromatic aberrations if your lens is suffering from that, from the situation that you're shooting in, as well as enable your lens corrections. You can see here that it already knew that I shot this image with my Sigma 51.4 art, and you can adjust the amount of distortion correction as well as the lens vignetting as well. I'm going to undo all of that by just turning off the lens corrections. We're not going to use it. I like the way the lens captured this image. And let's move on to geometry because this one might seem a little bit foreign. Now, we've already had a lot of these options available to us, but they haven't been shoved right in our face. You can see here you can go off the beaten path and start dealing with distortion on your own. I wouldn't recommend making it more bulbous. That's going to look bad for your subjects. Sometimes folks want to be brought in just a little bit. And you can always constrain your crop if you like. That means it would have no white edges and things like that. But I'm going to go ahead and undo all of those. You can tinker with those as you see fit. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. Now here's where things get really cool. Our adjustment brushes and things like that are also here on the right hand side at more of a top level, just like our edits. So you can do your cropping here. Aspect ratio is original. I want to keep that. If I really wanted to crop this image, I could. I can go there. There we go. Make it a little bit tighter on the subject. But again, here's where things get really cool. Here's our healing brush. Here's our adjustment brush. Here's our gradients. And here's our radial gradients as well. And this is how you can make some pretty cool adjustments. From a top level menu perspective, instead of having them kind of buried underneath the histogram in Lightroom Classic, and the histogram is something we'll get back to. So these kind of act and quack just really the same way that they did on Classic. Here I'm just going to draw a quick radial gradient here. I'm going to make my feathering pretty extreme, and I'm going to bring my exposure down substantially here just to see the effect. And this is kind of a dramatic effect here, just to get the point across that these still kind of act and quack really the same way. And again, you can hover over the node to see the masked area. You can invert your selection if you'd like. I'm going to uninvert it because that was my intention, was to do it that way. And you can still edit your selections just like you were able to in Lightroom Classic. So here I am, I'm adding to the gradient if I really wanted to. And the shortcuts still apply here too. If I press and hold Option, it will turn itself into the eraser, and I can start erasing more around this selection as well if I wanted to. Now let's say I want to just forget about it. With this node selected, I could always press delete with this selected. But if I have multiple going on and like I just want to get rid of everything, I can always press this button right here. This is going to reset everything I have going on for that tool. So great, I have my edit exactly where I want it. So let's go ahead and export this bad boy. So I'm going to click on File, Save To. And here's the new dialog box that we're left with. We can select our file type, we can select our location, and we can select the size, whether we want to do quote unquote small, whether we want to do full size, or a custom dimension that we would like to. I normally do around 2200 pixels if I'm going to be doing things for online purposes. I don't need to have 14 megabyte JPEGs laying around my computer all day long. That's not super necessary. So let's go ahead and click on this folder here. This is going to allow me to choose my location. I'm just going to save this to the desktop. I'm going to click choose. My long edge is going to be 2200 pixels, and I'll go ahead and save. When you do that, top left corner, just like Lightroom Classic, is going to let us know that saving is taking place. The action previously known as exporting. So here I'm going to go out of full screen, and you can see here that my JPEG has been exported. Then of course you can go back and forth and do this at your leisure. Do a group of photos and export the group, get them ready for Instagram or what have you, and you're good to go. Now the great thing about all of this is that this is going to mirror the user experience and user interface on your mobile devices. So I know this is super different, but the great news is that it's super different so that it can all be the same and all be a lot smoother going forward in the future. Well, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, it would be great if you liked this video, share it with some of your colleagues. I'll be doing a lot more videos with Lightroom CC. I'm really excited to do some more and release more onto the channel. I'm James Young with JamesYoungPhotography.com, and this is Teach Me How to Lightroom CC, not Classic. Yeah.